I hate to see you cry, laying there in that position. There's things you need to hear, so turn off your tears and listen. Pain pulls your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. No, it won't all go the way it should, but I know the heart of life is good. No, it's nothing new. Bad news never had good timing. But then a circle of your friends will defend the silver lining. Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole but I know the heart of life is good. Pain throws your heart to the ground, but love turns the whole thing around. Fear is a friend who's misunderstood, but I know the heart of life is good. I know it's good. I've seen love come and I've seen love walk away. So many questions, will anybody stay? It's been a hard year, so many nights in tears, all of the darkness trying to fight my fears. Alone, so long, alone. I don't know who I'd be if I didn't know you. I'd probably fall off the edge. I don't know where I'd go if you ever let go. So keep me held in your hands. I've started breathing, the weight is lifted. With you it's easy, my head is finally clear. There's nothing missing when you are by my side. I took the long road, but now I realize I'm home with you. I'm home. I don't know who I'd be if I didn't know you. I'd probably fall off the edge. I don't know about tomorrow. I just live from day to day. I don't borrow from its sunshine, for its skies may turn to gray. I don't worry o'er the future, for I know what Jesus said. Today I'll walk beside him, for he knows what is ahead. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. Every step is getting brighter as the golden stairs I climb. Every burden's getting lighter, every cloud is silver lined. The sun is always shining, there no tear will dim the eye. At the ending of a rainbow, where the mountains touch the sky, anything's about tomorrow. Oh, I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. I don't know about tomorrow. It may bring me poverty, but the one who feeds the sparrow is the one who stands by me. And the path that is my portion may be through the flame or flood, but his presence goes before me, and I'm covered in his blood. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. Oh, I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand.
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank Lauren Lucas Berline for that music while we gather here tonight. So, thank you. My name is Clay Stauffer. I am the senior minister here at Woodmont Christian Church, and I want to welcome all of you to this forum that we are calling After Covenant, Faith, Guns, and Keeping Tennesseans Safe. We all know that it was 8 weeks ago today that the tragic shooting happened at the Covenant School just down the street, and our community has been deeply impacted by it. Tonight, we've come together to have a dialogue, to hear from some very intelligent people about what can possibly be done and how we can continue to move ahead and work together as a community. I want to thank the Safer Voices for Tennessee. They have helped promote this event. They've also continued to raise awareness around these issues. And so I want to thank all of you that are a part of that for all that you have done. At this time, give them a round of applause. At this time, I want to introduce two friends of mine that are a part of this church who were impacted by this. Would you welcome Katie and Mike Dickhouse to come say a few words?
Thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you is not enough. Mike and I want to share our endless gratitude for all of the love and support we continue to receive from this whole community. In such tragedy and sadness, what you all have done is show love towards us, all of the victims' families, the Covenant School. It all has been overwhelming, and thank you truly just does not feel like enough. You all have continued to show us how to be beacons of light, strength, and love, like our Evelyn. And thank you to Reverend Stauffer, the Woodmont family, Senator Frist, and Dr. Jahangir for creating a space for us to come together tonight to discuss how we can all move forward to encourage both unity and change for the better. Also, thank you, Voices of a Safer Tennessee, for all the hard work you are doing to promote respectful conversation and change for this state. As we move forward, may God give us strength and courage to work together for a better future. We love you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike and Katie, for sharing those words. One last thing that I would like to do, there are many folks here who are from the Covenant community. So if you are a Covenant family, either the school or the church, would you stand so we can also recognize you and everything that you've been through this spring. So we want to thank them for being here as well. I'd like to begin with a word of prayer. So would you join me in prayer? Loving God, thank you for this forum tonight, for the chance to gather, to have a meaningful dialogue about a very important topic that has impacted our community and families across our nation. We continue to lift up all of the Covenant families, especially those who have lost loved ones, the Dickhouses, the Scruggs, the Kennys, the Hills, the Kuntzes, and the Peaks. Surround them with your love and your comfort, the ongoing prayers of our community. Thank you for the strength and resolve that we have all experienced over the past 2 months. Open our hearts and our minds that we can love and learn from each other so that we can make this world, your world, a safer place for all. Amen. Again, I welcome you to this forum. It is now a joy to introduce to you our moderator for the night. Would you welcome Ben Hall from News Channel 5?
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be part of this discussion, and I want to just go ahead and bring out all of the participants. First, Senator Bill Frist, heart-lung transplant surgeon and former U.S. Senator from Tennessee. He was the majority leader when he was in the Senate. So Senator Bill Frist, please come on out. Also, Dr. Alex Jahangir. He's an orthopedic trauma surgeon at the Level 1 Trauma Center in Nashville and the past board chair of the Metro Nashville Public Health Department. So Dr. Jahangir, please come on out. Of course, we know Clay Stauffer, senior minister here. All three of you wrote an op-ed back in April. You stated, "We are begging for an end to gun violence." You proposed some solutions that we'll get into, but I want to start first. Each of you, please address what brought you to the moment that you wrote that op-ed, what brings you here tonight, and what do you hope comes from this? And I'll start with you.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you all for being here. I have been taking trauma call for 20 years, 14 years here at Vanderbilt, here in Nashville. I've taken care of patients from the Waffle House shooting, from the Antioch Church shooting, from a school shooting in Kentucky a few years back. But I've taken care of people who've been victims of gun violence almost every week. And when the call came in for this tragedy that really brought us all together, it just hit me really close, right? I heard in real time what was going on, the outcomes, the fact that we actually couldn't help in this scenario. And as a father of 3 young kids myself, as somebody who wants a better world for them, I just also, like many of you, think that we need to say something, we need to do something, we need to make our world better, and that's what brought me here to join my colleagues here.
Senator Frist.
When we first put the idea together, first of all, I'm Bill Frist. It's great to be with you and appreciate the chance. But it really was a response by 3 people representing really millions of people who have silent voices for all sorts of reasons that we'll talk about tonight, from really 3 different sectors of our society. And the issues we talk about aren't going to be a point solution, not one law, not one regulation, but it's going to be all of us participating over a period of time. So that's the why of the op-ed. For me personally, sort of coming to this point, 2 things. For 20 years I did surgery. The surgery that I did was transplants, and the transplants depend totally on the most unselfish gift that one can give, and that's a donor heart or a donor lung. Just about all of those donors came from tragic accidents of some sort. A high percentage of those were caused by guns and weapons. Number 2, I had the chance to serve all of you for 12 years in the United States Senate, and I know the impact that policy can have if it's used appropriately, if it reflects the will of the American people based on values that are shared, for the most part, coming together. So wearing those 2 hats brings me here. The immediacy of it, why today and why not 5 years ago and 10 years ago? 2 things. Number 1 is this is a huge public health issue that is a new public health issue for the first time, really 2 years ago. It's gotten worse today, that the guns and these weapons are the number 1 cause of death for people under the age of 19. That's never been seen in any other country in history, but it has occurred today, and it's increasing. Number 1, more than infectious disease, more than automobile accidents. So it's a public health issue that is today, that was not as bad as 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And then number 2, the school attacks, the targeted school attacks, they've been in history before, but they're getting worse. If you look, there have been sort of 1,000 people who've either died or wounded over the last 5 years. That's never been true in history. That's twice as many as the 5 years before that. So it's an issue that is growing, that's before us, and now is the time for us all to act. And we'll talk about that action tonight.
Ben, first of all, thank you. Senator Frist, Dr. Jahangir, for coming and being here tonight. I'm very grateful. I can remember Columbine was my freshman year of college at TCU, and I can remember watching the news and just being so taken back. How could somebody do this? Why would somebody do this? This is so messed up. Since that time, that was 1999, as Senator Frist said, this has only become more and more and more common. And Sandy Hook, Newtown, really shook me. 19 kindergartners every time this happens, I feel like whatever we've been doing is not working. And then when this happened in Covenant, it was obviously personal, being the pastor, the Dick Houses and Evelyn, and also having many other families, many of which are here tonight, whose children were in that building and survived that, and what they're having to deal with afterwards. But I just can't sit back. The other answer that I would have is that, for me, it's a moral issue that we have to try to do something different. I believe that our children deserve better. I believe that our communities deserve better. And so as a pastor, I want to bring people together to help make that happen.
Senator Frist. Senator Frist, I want to ask you, polling data has repeatedly shown broad support for some kind of gun legislation, gun safety, gun control legislation, but it doesn't happen. Why is it not happening, from your experience in the political world?
It's a great question, Ben, and policy is important. It's not the only thing to do, but it is critically important, and that's why I opened with it in my introductory comments. Fox surveys show repeatedly that around 80% of Americans, this is Fox today, and I use Fox just because people say, Fox aren't going to report it in that way, but 80% of people, and anywhere between 75 and 85% of people, if you take, for example, the 4 things that we mentioned in our op-ed, and we can come back to those, but the American people, and the American people, not just people who are streaming us today and here, but both voters, rural and urban, on East Coast, West Coast, around the country are for it. So the question is why does that not get translated to the legislative branch of government, to the United States Senate, or to the House of Representatives at the federal level, or to the state legislature, or to the state house here in Tennessee? And that's where we come in, and that's why at the end of tonight, this afternoon, this evening, there's optimistic messages, is that we can change things. If the American people believe it, and we have a representative democracy, it is up to us to be able to translate that belief, that commitment, all the way up to the state house, all the way up to the federal government. It means phone calls. It means tomorrow go through a checklist of things that you do to reflect the will of the American people. It's the beautiful thing about our country that's not true in most other countries, but it is a call to action of each of us. The polarization we have today is very different than 20 years ago when I came to the United States Senate 30 years ago in the United States Senate. It is much worse in terms of left, right, Republican, and Democrat. There is no middle. An exaggeration today compared to when I was there, or to when Howard Baker was there in the 1970s today. So it is our job to overcome that resistance today by reflecting our views up through the system, and it can be done. There are ways to do that, which we can talk about tonight.
I want to talk about that. I want to ask you, Dr. Jahangir, and this fits into what he was just saying. Orthopedic trauma came about in the last 40 years, is that right? And it started after car wrecks. How do you see that as relevant in this debate when we're talking about guns?
Yeah, so the debate around guns right now has really become a cultural and ideologic identity, right? We don't talk about pragmatic gun issues, right? Whether you own a gun or not puts you in a certain club, and I'd like to break the fact. I think a lot of people belong in the club that people don't realize belong in the club. But we don't approach it about how do we work to make our community safe and our children safe. 50, 60, 70 years ago, car deaths were going up. We didn't have seatbelts, we didn't have airbags, we didn't have backup cameras. And people were getting hurt. You get in a fast car wreck and you die. Airbags came about, seatbelts came about, crush zones came about, leading to things that kept people alive, leading then to you breaking your legs and having expertise like I have now, which again is a 40 or so year endeavor. I mention that because Back then, if people became ideologic and cultural around, do you own a car or not, and you don't keep your hand off my car, we would never be here. We wouldn't have all the safety stuff we have now. Nobody took away anyone's cars. Nobody took away your ability to drive. They did maybe made you take lessons to drive. They maybe made you a little older to drive. But that has saved countless lives. And I think this discussion around gun safety should take the same pragmatic approach. Guns are killing people, just like cars did back then. We will never get to a point where that doesn't happen, just like that we don't get to a point where cars there'll always be motor vehicle fatalities. But we can do better if we just step back and think of pragmatic ways to keep our kids and others safe, just like we did for cars 40 years ago.
Clay, I want to ask you, some organizations have pushed back against any gun reform. They believe it's a slippery slope, that if you pass just the slightest reform, it leads to more reforms. And so they push back against everything. What do you say to people that don't want to compromise on either side? What do you say about the lack of compromise?
This is something that's bothered me for a very long time. If you're a part of Woodmont, you know that I have a conviction that we have to be able to talk about these things in the church, maybe not from the pulpit one way, but in groups and classes, because the polarization in our culture has just become rampant, and it's paralyzing. A lot of people, the gun lobby and others would say, if you give an inch, they'll take a mile. And so it's toe the line, toe the line, toe the line. But I'd like to put a different thought out there. If you don't give an inch, they might ultimately take a mile. Meaning, if you care about the Second Amendment, then you should be in favor of some sensible reforms and safety measures that should come along with the Second Amendment. And if we continue to live in this gridlock where we won't even talk about it, or it becomes the kind of ideological partisan litmus test, then it's going to be a big problem. And so I think that the polarization, the inability to talk about certain topics, and this mindset, if you give an inch, they'll take a mile, is a big problem. And they scare politicians. If you give on this, then we'll replace you. And that's a real problem.
And Ben, in terms of the framing, language is really important if you want to have a conversation. And the specifics of that, they're good words to use and they're not good words to use. If you come into a room today in a polarized America, where for the most part, coastal people don't agree with people in the middle part of our country on a lot of issues. Urban people don't agree with rural. So language is important to equalize that. For example, gun control, it immediately antagonizes about 50% of America. So use words gun safety. And there's a whole list of things that over the next 2 or 3 months before this special election, which we'll talk about, or this special session, it's important for all of us to put our heads around civil discussion and dialogue and framing things. If we don't, we'll just be talking to ourselves wherever you stand. America, and this is the way I look at it, America was founded on individualism, on freedom. We have a Bill of Rights. It goes back to the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. This is too much policy. But our country, it's inculcated in our culture of freedom and protection of individual rights. And a lot of America interprets that in one way, but it is important to know that's where our culture is. Then you have that versus, in many cases, like Alex sort of went through, this sort of individual rights, or driving too fast, or not wearing seatbelts, to safety. So you got individual rights versus safety. And the safety issues of our families, of ourselves, of our communities, of our country, there's a tension there. To put yourself in the head of some of the people who may be opposed to any further regulation, 65% of people in Nashville who own guns, they own guns for their own personal safety. They tell you that. It's in the polling data. So recognize that I'm a gun owner, I don't know, you're a gun owner, so we're gun owners. So it's not that guns in and of themselves are bad, but it's the regulation of those from a safety standpoint. So just we have to put ourselves in this sort of individualistic, but we have a Bill of Rights over in the individualism and protection, and I want to protect myself. And then the true safety is why we look at the sort of data and the sort of statistics that this is a problem that is getting worse. The number one killer of kids and teenagers in the United States of America. So it is time to put the seat belts on, to put a speed limit on it, to have common sense regulations coming forward.
There was an initial draft of your article in which it said all of you own guns. Is that right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
you all own guns. How do we get past this cultural divide? How do we talk about this in a way that is effective? Because I think so much of this is people talking past each other, and we don't get anything done. There's no way to talk about this effectively. And you may have said some of that, and I'll start with you, and maybe you can all go through.
Well, I think the key here is again, what I mentioned earlier, is the owning a gun is not a cultural or political ideology and tag that should be applied to people, right? It's a reality of choices that one makes. But I will say, in my personal situation, over 50 or 60 hours of private lessons, took the test, took responsibility, lots of steps to make sure that, I mean, this is the most public forum I've ever admitted that I own a gun. Probably most people here didn't know that who know me. And I mentioned that to say there's a lot of safety things that you know, that I think it's important as we talk about policies and things to do, you know, having responsible rules, or whether it's safely storing your gun, whether it's making sure your child lock is in place, whether make sure to maybe keep your gun unloaded and just lock it up, and to be a responsible owner. If I'm not mistaken, I think most of the weapons used in school shootings in general, and most of the weapons used by kids in suicides, are taken from the home. They're not things that go out. People go out to the store and just buy them. So safety at home leads to a lot of safety in the community. And so I think that's my big thing is responsible ownership. And just like a car, you go into my car analogy, I do a lot of car wreck surgeries. If you're out there drunk driving and not wearing your seatbelt and going fast, bad things happen. And I think that's a really important corollary.
And to delve down into that, Senator Frist, years ago it used to be rifles and shotguns were the big sellers. Now it's handguns. Rifles and shotguns, it was about hunting, recreation. Handguns, it's about safety. So when we talk about this cultural, how we're not communicating sometimes on the same level, what about that shift and how things have changed even since you were in office?
Yeah, if you look in the last 20 years, things have changed pretty radically. Up until about 1980, this is the sort of information that we all need to keep learning about. I'm learning about it, so again, tomorrow and the next day, just keep learning. In the 1980s and 1990s, most people who had guns in America, and right now there are 400 million guns in America, so you know, only 350 million people, or 420 million guns around. But in those days, it was mainly for hunting, and it might be for target practice, and it might be sort of these rights of boyhood and all. And then around 2000, there was very specific, guns actually were on the decline. And then around 2000, when the guns were on the decline, some of the semi-automatic weapons like this AR-15 appeared, and they were marketed specifically to you. And they were marketed to hunters, they were marketed after Afghanistan and Iraq as being manly, and then they were painted, these AR-15s, and then they're folded. The AR-15's a gun, you still have to pull the trigger, but it's like 60 or 70 shots, so that's just what you know what it is. And there were none around in 2000. When I was in the United States, AR-15 was unheard of. I never had heard of it really at the time. And now, over the last 20 years, because of the marketing of making it sort of a cool thing, a manly thing, a fun thing, painted, foldable, carrying it around with you, right now, 1 out of every 20 American adults have an AR-15. I'll repeat that just so it'll sit home. And this is from the Washington Post. They did a series. 1 out of 20 American adults have an AR-15. Now that's an average overall, so obviously some people collect them and they don't. But an AR-15 today, and so when you come in and say, we're gonna take all your guns away, or we're gonna take away an AR-15, you're talking to, maybe not in this room, but broadly. So coming back to sort of depoliticizing it, get the language right, I've already said that. And that's, study it over the next couple of months, what it is. Number 2, conversations just like this. The conversations have to be in trusted places, and that's places of faith, which is strong wherever you are, but generally just like this, because it's trust. And you listen to both sides. Physicians are still trusted today. Physicians need to be out front. It's the #1 public health issue for kids under kids in terms of death. So the physician community needs to be activated coming through. And the third most trusted, obviously, are teachers today, who obviously are on the front line coming through. And that, I think, if we start with that, we'll be able to go a long way on this journey to making gun ownership, the individual rights, the feeling that, yes, it may be there to protect me by the majority of gun owners today, is okay if it's in this network of safety.
I have a shotgun that was a gift from a friend years ago. Got some basic training on it. I'm not really a big hunter. I've been to shoot at the range, so I'm probably like the most JV gun owner up here on the stage, right? But why does it matter? Why does it matter that the three of us are gun owners? Because we have to get away from this mindset that it's just one radical leftist group trying to do gun control. There are many people that are gun owners, hunters, who want to see sensible reform. And so those are the people that have to speak out and say, I'm a gun owner, but I don't like the way things are going. I don't like how easy it is to obtain these guns, how you don't have to have a background check, how you can have an open carry. I mean, we have to talk about that and again, continue to break down the stigmas that it's just all people on the left that are pushing for that, because it's simply not true. And I think we have to put that out there, that there are Republicans and there are hunters and there are conservatives that would like to see sensible measures taken, and so they got to talk about it.
Just on that real quickly, the polling data that Vanderbilt released last week that was cited broadly, and I'd written about it in other articles, that of the national NRA, National Rifle Association, which is the big lobbyist who basically funds, and in primaries funds sort of all the not all, but most of the anti-gun safety issues themselves, that in the state of Tennessee, a red state, mainly a rural state overall, it fits all the sort of the gun safety well, let's go slow on it overall, but right at 60% of that group of gun owners today who are members of the NRA today are for what we call red flag, we'll talk about, but the red flag laws out there today. So even the people you'd say, no, they're not for it, 60% are for it.
But if that's true, then why doesn't it pass? Because we just had a chance in the legislature. Is it the money that these groups give to lawmakers? Is it gerrymandering that they're worried about a challenge from the right? Why, if it is 80, if the numbers are that high, why does nothing seem to move forward?
Well, we talked about it. It's the polarization of our politics today. We probably aren't going to solve that. I mean, if I look at you and you and you and you and say, let's solve the polarization in politics today that's changed over 20 years. These are deep social cultural issues. You can change it and participate. You're not going to solve that. What you are going to solve is know where these mayoral candidates stand and vote accordingly. How many of you know your state, and this, we're in church, so you got to tell the truth. How many of you know your state, not your congressional, your state representative? Raise your hand. Okay, about 40%. How many know your state senator? Remember where we are. Okay, about 20%. No, about 20% for people who are listening. 100% of you, if you want to change this politicization this understanding, you have to have your hand up, and then you need to write a letter to them tomorrow. If not, how is it going to change?
I want to add that we're going to take some questions from the audience. There are some sheets of paper that are in the pews there. If you write on those pieces of paper, Jay will come around and hand me a couple of questions. Quick question before we start going into some of the details of what y'all are proposing. Clay, how involved should churches be? I know you've talked about a purple church, meaning open to Democrats, Republicans. Does taking on this issue threaten that in any way? And how involved should churches be in this issue?
One of the problems with Christianity in the 21st century is that people are picking churches based on their politics. Something that I really don't want to happen here. I want people to come to church because they believe in God, they want to grow closer to Jesus Christ, and let politics be secondary. However, there are issues like this that are real and impact real people, and I think we have to talk about it. And guess what? Not everybody is going to agree on what the solution is or isn't, right? We identified 4 possibilities. Senator Frist wrote a follow-up article in Forbes where he laid out 11 or 12. We're not going to agree on the specifics, but we have to be able to talk about it in a neutral, non-threatening way. So to answer your question, I think churches need to acknowledge that consensus is going to be hard, but if you can't sit around with your brothers and sisters in Christ, your family of faith, and have the conversation, then where can you? And again, one of the problems is that now even churches are becoming all red or all blue. And so I've always proudly said Woodmont is purple. And I don't know what the breakdown of it is, but I think that we need more purple churches. So the dialogue needs to happen.
So let's talk about the things you all proposed in the article. I'm going to read the 4 things, and Senator Frist, you proposed other things in a Forbes article. Enact extreme risk protection orders. Implement child access, prevention, and safe storage laws. Expand background checks to all firearm purchases. Require firearm safety courses for ownership. Dr. Jahangir, why don't you start, take a couple of those, and we'll just kind of go through this list. How did you come up with this list?
Well, I think these, you can imagine the dialogue we had as we were talking about writing this article. And because I think what we didn't want to do is make this just another article out there that really polarizes people very quickly. The 4 things you just read are all very common sense things. Extreme risk protection order, right? If you're worried your loved one is going to take a gun, buy a gun, perhaps harm themselves, right? We don't talk about the fact that 50% of suicides are committed by guns. If you think you're in a relationship in which your significant other is going to go out and maybe hurt you or hurt someone else, we need to protect ourselves and our communities. And I think that's the first thing, right? And I think there's guardrails you can place around it that has been shown to be effective in states, whether it's Connecticut or Indiana, these states all have them. Politically different, they have them, they work. And then the safety thing, 70% of guns stolen in Nashville are stolen out of cars. I think 90-something% of those guns are used to hurt somebody else. Like, they don't steal these to go sit at their house to protect themselves. They're used to commit a crime. Like, how's that not a responsible thing to do? I'm not going to give my kid a bunch of alcohol because I can. You have to be responsible for what you have. And then I think those 2 things for me are really important, and I'll let others discuss.
Are you going to take any of them? You go ahead.
We lean really heavy on Senator Frist on the policy side.
No.
Well, good. Let me say this. And then,
yeah, pick one.
For me, Woodmont people know this. It's also personal for me. My mother took her own life 18 years ago with a gun that we had no idea she had at a time when she had no business having a gun. 2005, Labor Day. And so I've talked about that and written about that. So at that particular time, my mother was depressed. She did not need to have access to a gun, and she was able to get a gun. Why would anybody push back on background checks on guns? I mean, if there's people that can't pass a background check, we probably don't want them with guns, right? So these are just some basic things, and there's personal things, not just with what happened at Covenant, but suicide is a big part of that. The statistics: 30% of those gun deaths with children is suicide, and lots of people attempt suicide different ways, but if you have a gun, you're going to be 85% likely to succeed versus overdose and other things. I will say that Alex and I have both learned a lot from Bill and his team about these policies, and you can also differentiate between this really makes sense, this can get bipartisan support. So that's what I would add.
Let's go through them real quick, and I'll read those off again. I'll just give you 2 sentences on each one. And the policies are important because they're doable, and they can get done. People say, well, you say that, and in this partisan world, nothing can get done. The largest, I'll say, and I'll qualify it, gun safety legislation in the last 30 years was passed by the United States Congress and signed by the president 12 months ago. Probably 10% of you in the room knew that. It funded $1 billion in mental health. It put money in incentives for states to put money into schools. It looked at school safety. It did a whole range of things to give states incentives. But it's important to know there was an assault ban in 1994. I mention those, and again, the times are very different today, but I mention those because you can change federal policy. You can influence federal policy. But policies aren't going to solve the issue. It's important to know that guns are the instrument. Guns are like the scalpel that I use and Dr. Jahangir uses. It's not the root cause. And the root cause we cannot forget in all our fervor for trying to pass policy. And we need to talk about the root cause. And the root cause is complicated in terms of the world today. For school shootings, there is no profile of a shooter, period. There is no school that is targeted, period, if you look at the last 17 shootings. And so we have to come back and look at what can you do, and what you can do are things like identify the threats of somebody who is likely to engage or who might engage. And we'll come back to that, but let me give you the policy. And I say that because we can't oversimplify and just say passing a red flag law is going to change things dramatically by itself. Or any of the 4 things we proposed, or the 11 that I put in the Forbes article itself. It's going to take us really thoughtfully coming back, looking at root causes. Where have we gone wrong? Where has society gone wrong today? And where we can correct it? And that's why churches need to be in the middle of this discussion. Read them real quick. I'll go quick.
I'll read each one. First, enact extreme risk protection orders.
I can't even say extreme risk protection order, but everybody in this room and everybody listening has got to be able to say it and know what it means. It is like a red flag law, and there are a little bit of differences in there, but the reason it's important, it's the #1 issue that's going to come before our state legislature in 3 months, on August 27th or whenever it is. You've got to know it if you're going to influence and change our culture. And what it is today, we have a sort of this special protection order today for a spouse that you have out there. If you threaten a spouse, action can be taken, your guns can be taken away. If you threaten a church, it cannot be taken away. If you threaten a school, it cannot be taken away. And that's what the governor, in all likelihood, will propose to the state legislature, and they'll react to that. 83% of the American people today support that, and that is our job. So remember that one. You got to know it. #2.
Implement child access prevention and safe storage laws.
Safe storage laws of the violent crime in Nashville, Tennessee this year. Most of it occurs out of guns stolen from cars. Pretty interesting. And right now, you can keep a gun in your car, and the law basically says that. Well, if that's what the law is going to say, how can you safely, do you lock your car or not? The safe storage at home, and Dr. Jahangir mentioned it, for the school shootings themselves, these guns are coming from home, from shooters that are underage, however you define that today. Right now, if you talk to most people in Tennessee, and we did a poll here in Nashville itself, most people do not keep their guns locked up at home. Next.
Expand background checks to all firearms purchases.
It just makes sense today. You get a background check. If somebody is a felon before, well, in Tennessee, we do not have universal background checks today. We have background checks for firearms that are purchased, and they have to go through a federal program themselves if you buy that. But for the private gun shows themselves, there is no background check done whatsoever in Tennessee. Well, there are probably reasons for that. It's probably impossible to do. No, it's not impossible to do. Don't hold me exactly to the figure, but between 15 and 19 states have universal background checks. And the data shows that if you do a background check today, that you will diminish the amount of violence used with guns today. We do not have a universal background check. Most gun owners in Tennessee did not have a background check. Next.
Lastly, require firearms safety courses for ownership.
Well, this goes back to the hunters, and if you talk to the hunters in Tennessee today, they require a gun safety program to get your hunting license in Tennessee. And if that's the case, and if you're going to have a weapon, especially a weapon that can shoot 60 bullets in 1 minute, you should have a safety course of some sort. That's where the common sense comes in. So those are 4 examples. States have legislated on all of those. Tennessee has not. We do have a special order for domestic, but we don't extend it beyond that. So we have a long way to go. But again, I'll have to say that these policies are important. We can fight for them. We have a teachable moment here, and we can come back to this if you want, in terms of the next 3 months, because every legislator is going to have to vote on these issues coming forward.
And I'll begin to take the questions here in a moment. But I want to ask about mental health, because that's the other thing you hear a lot about. Dr. Jahangir, how do we even begin to broach this topic when it comes to mental health and gun safety?
I think one has to be very clear that correlating mental health and isolation to gun violence is a disservice, and one shouldn't do that, right? 20% of Americans have a diagnosable mental health condition. 6% have what are considered major diagnoses of schizophrenia, paranoid, bipolar, and major depression. Just because you have a mental health condition is not going to mean you're going to go out there and commit a violent act. And we need to not stigmatize mental health and isolation. But there are individuals who have mental health conditions who then show signs of something impending. And that's where the ERPOs and other type of things can hopefully save the community. With that said, I think going back to the conversation around suicide is important. 60% of gun deaths are are suicides. 50% of suicides are committed by guns. And as Clay said, 85% success rate if you attempt suicide by gun. If you attempt by overdose, it's 3%. And the reason that matters is over 90% of people never go on to commit again. So I think it's a really complicated situation that I think it does a service to try to stigmatize it. There's some small correlation that maybe should be watched, but I think it's really important. Where mental health and gun violence really intersects, though, is suicides, and we need to protect our loved ones in that capacity.
Clay, do you want to answer that?
Well, I will tell you, in seminary, I took a number of classes at Princeton Seminary that were focused on mental health, persons in pain, anxiety disorders, because I was very much interested in pastoral care and pastoral counseling. And I can tell you, having been in the church for a very long time now, probably the thing that I feel least equipped to deal with is mental illness, because I have seen it all over the board. And so I'm up here with 2 medical doctors who are much more qualified than me to talk about mental health. But I do know that it's real, and I do know that it's a crisis, and was before the pandemic, and has especially been since the pandemic. And so what you've got is this perfect storm of easy access to guns and people who are not well, and that's come together, and it's a nightmare. So I know when you start talking about mental health, there's all kinds of nuances and all types of things that you have to be careful about, but it is an absolute problem in our culture. People are struggling. I see it in the church. I see it in the community.
And Senator Frist,
I think on the mental health, because it's really important, because you'll hear people say it's just a mental health issue. And if we spend $1 billion on mental health, it will change the tragedies that are happening in schools today. And we have to be very careful. I think Dr. Jahangir hit it. 20% of the American people have a mental illness. And we just look around, every 5 in the row, 2 of you have something that is diagnosable and that is serious, and that interferes with your life. We can't stigmatize mental illness. That's been the problem with the medical profession. It's been our society. We all grew up with these images. We got to get beyond that. The medical profession does okay with it, but really not that good. Congress, we passed mental health parity to physical health and mental health. They're the same. They should be reimbursed the same. They should be treated the same, and it's not done. That's number one. Number two, if you look at all community violence with a gun, only 4%, and this is why you can't stigmatize mental illness, only 4% has a serious diagnosable mental illness. Let me repeat that. Of all the community violence with a gun, only 4% has a diagnosable serious mental illness. So we have to be really careful not to stigmatize it. We underinvest in it. We have too few psychiatrists, too few psychologists, too little reimbursement for it. We need to do a lot more. What I would encourage us to do to start with, because it is a big issue, is to look at targeted school violence, where we know we have 17 incidents in recent history that we can study, and it has been studied today. And I've already mentioned that you can't categorize these people. You can't profile them, because there is no profile. But what you can do, and coming back to the mental illness, just about all of these individuals themselves have either a psychological diagnosis of some sort. That's number one. Number two, a behavioral. And these are students, these are young people that has, for the most part, about 50% of all of them have been seen by mental health people. 50% of the school shootings have been seen by a mental health visit of some sort coming in. But it's either psychological, it might be anxiety, it could be bipolar, behavioral, they've acted out, they've been in disciplinary in the principal's office, or the third is developmental. They have some sort of developmental disability. Once you can categorize, you can identify if we as parents, and if we as teachers, and if we as community leaders basically say, well, we can do an assessment. And then it's our obligation, this is in the schools, and then it's our obligation to have these little red flags and yellow flags, which we know what they are today, to be able to identify them and make the appropriate referral to someone in the community. It may be in the school, it may be a school health professional. Governor Lee actually, focused on that initially right afterwards. He said we need to do more health in the schools. And then we as a society have to make sure that those targeted people have the resources, that those individuals are approached directly and with mental health services. And so we're not trying to cure the whole world, but we're being able to focus the resources where we know there is a real need. That's an example, and you can apply it to other areas as we go through. And then all of a sudden it's a digestible problem. It's owned by the community, it's owned by the government, it's by the teachers, by the veterans, by the people in communities, by the churches. We all can do that. And it's a threat assessment approach to this issue of violence in schools.
You've called this a teachable moment. We are certainly at a critical time where there's about to be a special session and they're going to talk about gun legislation. So I want to ask each of you, and Senator Frist, you can go last, what are some action items people in this room can do that might influence that special session?
Look, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I've been I've been impacted by this just like you, everyone here has, and it's hard. what's really lifted me up is seeing a lot of friends and people I don't know create an organization, Voices for Safer Tennessee, that has done so much so quickly. There are great, I've checked out the website a bunch of times, talked to a lot of you, great tools that are available to learn how to advocate and to speak. There are a lot of legislators in our state that I think knowing they had support would support something. We need, and they're not all the 8 or 9 or how many are in the Nashville area, right? We need to get out. All of you, I don't know, go to Mount Eagle. When you go to Mount Eagle, talk to your Mount Eagle rep. Go to Knoxville. Go to Tipton County, wherever. We need to get our voices out there. We need people to see that these are people who just care about their families and their communities. There's just not some agenda that's trying to get somebody elected. And be civil. And I think for us, that's all I can do. And I think a lot of people in here can do probably a lot more. And so for me, that's how I'm going to approach this.
One idea is you could have a forum at your church where you talk about it, right? And you invite really intelligent people to come. And so anyway, that was just one thought. Sorry, low-hanging fruit. I think one of the things that I'd like to see, and I've already mentioned it, is that we've got to get away from this ideological divide that, that only liberals care about gun safety or gun reform. It's just not true, and we have to break that down and have those conversations. And then I've heard directly, and I know this, that there are people who represent more rural, more conservative districts who feel like if they were to speak out on this or vote for this or give an inch on this, they feel like they will be out. And so we have to find a way to somehow, and I think Voices for Safer Tennessee is doing this, we have to find a way to get the message into those districts and say, just because Covenant School wasn't in your town, it could happen to you. I mean, somebody mentioned Pulaski was one of the first, mass shootings years ago. It could happen to you, and we have to get the message to the people that feel like their constituents don't care about it, because I think that they do. And then I'd also just say something that's a broader observation, that I think our primary system is making democracy difficult, because there's only a certain amount of people that pay attention to primary races, and by and large, it's the people that are more on the margins or on the fringe. And if we have over 80% of the people want to see something happen, then we got to start to get that message to multiple legislatures and let them know that after a while, if you continue to kick this can, then maybe that will be what puts you out, and not the other thing. So continuing to get the message out to different districts and have a real honest conversation that there's bipartisan support. This is not a wedge issue, and it is impacting many, many lives.
Amen. Now, do you have like guest cards where you put pencils out in there? Do people ever take notes when you're up there? Rarely.
Hope so.
You hope so. That's right.
I don't know.
All right. So
maybe
I say
not.
that if there's a pencil there, because I'm going to summarize a little bit. Number one, from a policy standpoint, because that's sort of why I'm on the stage, we have an unbelievable opportunity that no other state in America has right now, a red state, and that is our governor had the courage to basically propose to a state legislature who is probably overwhelmingly I don't want to characterize, who probably would rather not have a special session in the aggregate to address an issue that they could lose an election over if they're not effective, that money will flow in terms of affecting their vote and about supporting their next election. But our governor had the courage. It's a teachable moment for all of us to have these sort of discussions. Other states don't have that. And so that's over the next 3 months. It's at the end of August. So let's continue it, number one. So that's the policy. There is a website that you can go on. I won't give it to you now, but it's tennessee.gov/gov. I know you can't remember that. But just so you know, there is a website. If you go to the press release, there's a link that you can give the governor what your feelings are. If you're on the left or the right or up or down, it doesn't matter, just to put either your support or not support in there. So I would do that. Number two, from a community level, coming down to the federal level, we hit it. Whether it's in the doctor's office or whether it's in places of worship, trusted places, have the dialogue. And we said that again and again. I will say social media, and this may surprise you, is probably not the place to have the dialogue. Social media is divisive, and even if you have your own little chat room, it gets divisive and divides people. It's sort of counterintuitive because I'm saying have community discussion, and it is a place of discussion, but on this particular issue, it's probably more divisive than not. Number three, create or join a gun safety group. And you do that really to get information and we've cited a lot of facts and figures. And I would do that. Voices for a Safer Tennessee, which we both all mentioned, is a newer group that's bipartisan working together, but there are others that are out there. Number three, mental health services in schools. We need the better mental health services in schools. So the people who are identified, who need it, have the chance to get the appropriate treatment today. But at the individual level, know your representative. You've all embarrassed yourself already. I had to remind myself before coming here, by the way, because I knew you'd ask me. But basically, if we're going to change things, we got to change things. If you want to change politics, you got to change politics. So you got to get in the room, write a note, write a letter, and most importantly, vote. Number five, op-eds still are a great way to communicate. The written word is important, and I mentioned about social media. Number six, get the conversation right. When you come in, don't offend the person you don't agree with, and I use the gun safety versus gun control as sort of the surrogate on that. Understand both sides of the issue. When I say that most gun owners in Tennessee, have guns because they're worried about the safety of their family and in their car, just understand that if you happen to be on another side. As a gun owner, Dr. Jahangir said, take a safety course, encourage other people to take a safety course, and for sure, if you have guns, because they will get stolen, keep them under lock and key. And lastly, on local schools, and this hadn't been mentioned, but if we look at the root cause, and we say we got this impact, this sort of number one public health issue, which is why churches should look at it, number one public health issue, and guns are the instrument. We need to address the guns, but we need to go back to the root cause. And one example of a root cause, which I feel strongly about and teachers have told me about, is this whole issue of bullying in school. It used to be if you had bullying in school, you just kind of dismiss it and say, if it's your kid, you'll get over it. Or, if you heard that somebody's bullying somebody, you remember being bullied, and therefore it's a different age with social media. Bullying is going on at an increased level, and it doesn't stop at night because social media reinforces it. When it's reinforced, your brain is hooked up in a way, literally, physically, chemically fixed up in a way that bullying becomes a life and a lifestyle coming for us. I throw that out. And lastly, I mentioned, I think we need to do a better job supporting our schools in terms of addressing what is threat assessment. You can't profile these kids, but we know the ones who ultimately are going to have problems in our communities, ultimately will be violent coming in. And the threat assessment is a whole program that I think people need to look at. So those are 9 things to look at, too many, but just so you know, there are things that can be done. You can change the course of history. The trends are going this way in terms of bad, and we have within our command the opportunity to reverse them.
I'm going to take some questions now. One, we have seen this cycle of a shooting, a lot of discussion, and then nothing happens significant. Are you optimistic we are now in a time that is different? Is this a different time? How optimistic are you? Clay, I'll start with you.
I'm optimistic based on what I've seen and experienced in Middle Tennessee over the past 8 weeks, but I don't think we can let up. There were some good bills that were put out right after Covenant, and there was a lot of different things happening down in the legislature during that time that kind of overshadowed it. And so I think a lot of people would say if we could have tried to act on it when it was fresh and it just happened, that maybe something would have passed. I mean, I'm still optimistic, but I think that there's a lot of work to continue to do in terms of having the dialogue, educating everybody like the senators talked about, and making sure that the politicians know that this isn't going away. I mean, one of the things I know that Katie and Mike always say, and they've met with many people, is we'll be back. We'll be back. This matters to our family. This matters to our community. We'll be back. And so I'm optimistic based on what I'm experiencing or what I've seen here in Middle Tennessee, but I still think that there's work to be done.
There are a bunch of questions here for you, Senator Frist. I'm going to ask this question. How do you combat the money that seems to rule the state legislature when it comes to guns? The NRA and gun manufacturers have the power. How do you combat that?
That's exactly right. It's a challenge, and the only thing that can overcome it is a change in culture and a participation, have a participatory democracy. It's the only thing. You're not going to do it. It's interesting that the money flows primarily to our primary system today, and it in part explains the polarization that we have. And our primary system, like in congressional elections or in state house elections, it doesn't take very much money to influence an election. And good, bad, or indifferent, that's the reality today. So the only way you can counter that is either with money. And if you look at the amount of money that is spent for literally opposing any sort of gun safety or gun control, it's this big, NRA mainly, because that's where people know to give. And the amount of money coming in on the other side of having reasonable gun safety issues is that much. Really important to hear. You can say that's bad and that's evil, it shouldn't be that way, but that's the reality. So it does mean those people who are capable in supporting people who are like-minded to where you are on this issue, you should, and I'm not saying give a lot of money, you ought to give $1, you ought to give $3, you ought to give $5, or some people are giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to the other side. And that's the reality. Whereas the only counter to that is changing culture. And you change culture through not just the 9 or 11 points I gave you, but having these conversations where it is from the heart and then participating in the process itself.
Dr. Jahangir, this is a tough one. The state of Tennessee just passed a law shielding munition and gun manufacturers from legal liability. Is there any rationale for this? And I'll let others go with that, but what do you think of that?
So I've taken care of patients who've been shot with handguns, who've been shot with high-powered rifles, who, by the way, are 3 times the power of a handgun. I've seen the impact when they come to my clinic. The lives have impacted when they're paralyzed. Their kids running around, they can't hold their kids. A mom crying to me when she looks at me and says, well, what am I going to do about my son right now? There's a huge impact that happens from the morbidity that results from gun violence, much less the mortality. I mean, God, that's a whole nother discussion. So I'm not a lawyer. But I've seen the true both financial impact, moral impact, the years of positive somebody could do in the world if they get shot in their 20s. And as a society, we need to stop that, right? And so whether one should sue a gun manufacturer or not, it's not an issue I've really thought about. But what I have tried to think about is, how do you support this 20-something-year-old who's now paralyzed from the neck down because they got shot in an attempt to get their heart and they go in the wrong place? I don't know. But it impacts all of us because we're going to support that person's health care. We're going to support the loss that person now can't give to society. We need to think about that.
We have heard several legislators say an extreme risk protection order, which is what the governor is talking about, dismisses due process. What is your response to this? So explain, please, what due process is. This is going to be an argument we're going to hear against these extreme risk protection orders.
So, extreme risk protection orders are essentially red flag laws. Basically, if you see somebody who is dangerous, who has made a threat, you have the opportunity to go in using a due process manner to take that weapon away that they threatened a church or a person outside of the domestic partner, which is the rule of law today. The debate will be, how far do you go in terms of protecting individuals? Doesn't that individual have a right to say anything that they want to say? Doesn't that, if that person has not committed a crime, but basically have threatened doing something which would be a crime, do you basically come and infringe on their individual rights in such a dramatic way? And that'll be the question. Again, coming back to my individual federalist and anti-federalist discussion and constitutional rights discussion coming in. So what the governor, I don't know what the governor is going to do, but what the discussion is going to do is to build due process in for that individual. And the way the governor, I can't speak for the governor. I've never talked to the governor about this. But the way the initial discussion is, and he's doing listening tours now to actually finalize it, is to say, yes, if somebody is going to threaten, you have to report it to, I mentioned, a law enforcement officer. You can't just go in and have, a community health worker or a community enforcement person come in and take it away, which protects the due process of the individual, because that law enforcement has to go to a court. And in most red flag laws, you don't have to go to a court in other states. But here in Tennessee, you will have to go to a court and have a judge rule on that within a specified time in order to take those weapons away. So you have due process on the sense of the individual being able to work through the system. And the debate will be how far you go. How much time do you have? How long do you take the weapons away themselves? And that's what I'm sure the debate will be, and that's a legitimate debate in America and in Tennessee today.
Due process matters, obviously, and people want to assure that somebody can't just be reported and their guns confiscated for no reason. I do think one of the parts of the debates that's going to be on the table is what kind of period of time between when that person is reported and when they actually get their date in court before a judge, and can you take the guns right then and there, or do you have to wait 3 to 5 days or 6 days? And I think those are all specifics that are going to be consequential, and I know that just from talking to some lawmakers as to what does that look like and what can happen initially when if the guns are seized right then, or they say we'll see you next Tuesday when you get a chance to come explain yourself. I think it's way more complicated than some people want to pretend.
Right. People get a chance to defend themselves.
Sure.
It doesn't just.
Right.
Clay, I'm going to ask you this kind of cultural question. Senator Frist mentioned social media. It's not the best place to debate these things. What role does social media play in the violence that we're seeing and gun violence? That's the question.
Well, I would take it a step back and ask the question, what role do these video games that many of our kids play when they're 7, 8, 9 years old, where they are online, shooting each other up? And, I've asked that question for a long time. Why, whatever happened to, football and Madden and those kind of things? But I do think that we now live in a digital age where there's so much available at the touch of a fingertip, and many kids have these devices and they can access it. And so it's a problem. I agree with what Senator Frist said, that the debate around this issue is going to be had in forums like this and around the table. I don't see a lot of examples on social media of a civil, balanced debate. It's usually echo chambers and zingers and who can get the other person, right? So I think that having these types of conversations in person and in a safe space where you feel like whatever your opinion is or your belief is, it's going to be respected and not dismissed. But I do think that culture at large and the glorification of violence, whether it's video games and Hollywood and just what our children can access very easily, has been a problem for a long time. And I don't exactly know what to do about that and how you change that. I know some parents are much stricter in terms of what their kids can access than others, but that's a really, really challenging one. And I can't help but think that it's played a big role in where we are now.
Go ahead.
The social media explains a lot of why we have partisanship today. The feedback loops of individual senators. I was in Washington 2 weeks ago when we were talking that right now it used to be if you had 100 people, 100 senators together, your feedback loop would be within that body or the governance of that body. The feedback loop for an individual senator or representative today doesn't matter what is in that body. It's with social media. And you put something out, it goes to social media, depending on how much money that social media can raise or how many votes you can get is your feedback loop today. Similarly, for your kids and for all of us today, social media has been the place that people go at night or after schools, and therefore you have no break. The algorithms are built in by these sites to pull people to extreme positions, kids, but also adults, which we know. And when the difference is with kids, it applies to bullying as well, but also violence. When the kids go home and then they're pulled into these sites, which pull them to extreme positions and more violence, there's no break. And therefore, the mind gets hooked up that way. It's reinforced that way, no matter how good of a parent you are. And all of you deal with this. You know, I don't have young kids. I got 9 grandkids today, so I'm thinking about it. But take, I think, exposure to nature. Given a break where it's not this constant reinforcement, whether it's violence or bullying, that you can't get away from it all, and spend an hour in nature. Take vacations in nature to give you a break where you have a much more holistic, a much healthier, a much more balanced approach to life and living there today. But clearly it has an impact.
This is for Senator Frist. We hear a lot about the Second Amendment. Why does our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness not stand at the top of gun safety discussions? So how do you tackle that?
Well, I'm not sure exactly where the question takes you, because I think it is at the top of most discussions and the way most people in Tennessee feel, in that we do have an individual right, and this is where my analogy of individual, to own guns, and I respect that, and all of us, we believe in that particular right. It's where you take it to the extreme that right has no capping on it, has no governor on it, has no regulations around it, not for your individual, well-being or what you believe, but for your family or for your community or for your schools or for your state. And that's the tension, the natural tension we have in this country today. And where is that governor? Where do you put that governor to pull back and have sensible regulation on data where we know the problems lie? And that's why over these next 3 months, why it's this teachable moment, we need to get good information. What are the facts? Put ourselves on the other side when we're having discussions. Use the right language coming in. And then, as I've said before, I think we have a huge opportunity that other states don't have to move towards reasonable reform. One red flag law is not going to change this. It's going to take going to Washington. It's going to have people who have been affected by the tragedy to tell the story, just to let people listen a little bit more. And then the policy gets wrapped around it. And then the churches get wrapped around it, and the doctors coming in. And then we can affect change. I have seen big things change. It takes 20 years. It may take 10 years, but still that journey is worth it. I'll just have to quickly say, when I started in the United States Senate, you sent me there was no doctors in the Senate, and 3 million people were dying a year of HIV/AIDS. Heavily stigmatized. Most people in Tennessee said, why are you going up there, looking at it? And it did take 15 years, but with that thing that was killing 3 million people a year today, history has been reversed. So these big things can be changed, but it's hard. It's step by step. It's having people say no as we go forward.
Add to that, I think that's a really important question. I don't know exactly who asked it or why, but third graders deserve to go to school and then come home. Go to school, do what you do at school, and then come home. And we had some that didn't get to do that. And then a lot of us have had children, maybe not at Covenant, who have asked us, is it safe to go to school? Well, of course it is, but this is what I saw on the news. So why would they think it's safe to go to school? So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I mean, third graders deserve to go to school and then come home. And so it is infringing on people's ability to live a life of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I'm gonna give everybody one more chance, basically to wrap up. Your final thoughts, what do you want people to take away? Just what did you take from this discussion? What do you want people to take from it? Dr. Jahangir, your final thoughts. What do you want people to take away?
My final thoughts is I'm inspired. I'm inspired by you guys. I'm inspired by Evelyn. I'm inspired by the group. I think we need to continue this momentum. I'm grateful for everyone here for stepping up for it. And listen, this impacts all of us. We all have young kids, and I'm gonna do what I can in my capacity, and I ask everyone else to do that.
I'm optimistic that times are different. I know they're different. Whether it's a public health issue, that wasn't a public health issue. It is the gun ownership has changed radically in terms of things like the AR-15. So now's the time to act. So I just ask you to do one thing. First of all, figure out who your state representative is, and tonight or tomorrow, write them. And if I can get 20% of you to do that, it'll be success. Do the same thing, and you use the same words for your state senator. They're going to be dealing with this issue right now in the next 2.5 months. And then they won't forget it, but for the most part, it won't be on the agenda again for a while. And then I ask you to do the same thing with the governor. Go to the website and basically say, Governor, this is the way I feel. And just do that tomorrow. And if you do that tomorrow, at least for me, knowing how our democracy works, knowing how representative government works, it'll have a great impact. That'll be a simple thing. Next 24 hours, write those 3 people.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank, there's a number of folks that are watching on the live stream and can watch it in the future. So thank you for joining us on the live stream. I'm proud of this church because we have done our best to be there for this community, for Covenant, for many families, not just Woodmont families, but many families that have been struggling. And I'm also proud of our church because we're not afraid to have this dialogue. I think we live in a culture where people are scared to get political out of fear that they will alienate and marginalize or whatever, and then we don't talk about the important things, and this is an important thing. And if you hear somebody that you know and respect that brings a different opinion and it really surprises you, that's okay. Be thankful that you're talking about it, and we got to be willing to talk about it. I lift up Voices for Safer Tennessee. They've really made a lot of headway over the past couple of months, and they help promote this event. There's some flyers in the back, and some of you opted in, if you RSVP'd for this event, to get their emails. So I'll continue to lift them up as a bipartisan or nonpartisan event, and they need support. They need support to get their message out there and to continue this into the future. But I guess my takeaway is I just would love to see civility return to our culture. That's what's been missing. Civility's been dying a slow death. If you want to read a great book, go get Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's book, Morality. It came out a couple of years ago before he died. And he talks about how civility has been dying a slow death, and we all suffer because of it. So we have to be able to talk about these things honestly, respectfully, and I feel like that's what we're trying to do tonight. So I'm grateful to everybody for being here.
Let's show appreciation for our panel. That was a great discussion. Thanks to those who gave us questions. And Clay, I guess you want to kind of close things out, right?
Yeah, I'm just going to close you with a prayer that many of you have heard before, the prayer of St. Francis. So take this as a benediction or prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Go in peace. Thank you all for coming.